How do you react when your own parents tell you they regret your birth in front of the whole family? Do you scream, cry, or do what I did? Stand up, tell them to pretend I never existed, and walk out of the house they live in but I own? 30 minutes later, while I sat in my car in complete silence, my phone showed 36 missed calls, and the real panic was only just starting. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Ethan, and on the night this started, I thought I was just going to another uncomfortable family dinner. I was 38, still the responsible one in my parents' story. I had my own apartment across town, a stable job as a financial analyst, and a quiet life. But my parents still talked about me as if I was a boy who never quite measured up. They lived in the house I had helped save years ago when money was tight, but they treated that help like some kind of invisible duty I was born with, not a choice I made. That evening, I parked in front of their house and sat there for a moment with the engine off. The driveway looked the same as always, a little cracked concrete, the same flowers my mother liked, the same porch light that flickered when it rained. The catering van was still outside. I had paid for that catering. I had even helped my mother choose the menu over the phone, listening while she complained that nothing was good enough. It was my father's birthday and also a celebration of my parents' long marriage. A big night for them. A big night for their image. Inside, the house was crowded and loud. I could hear my father's laugh before I even reached the dining room. My mother met me in the hallway with a tight hug that was more for show than for me. She smelled of perfume and kitchen smoke. She spoke in a bright voice that sounded fake, saying that I was finally here and that they almost thought I had forgotten them. She said it loudly enough for people nearby to hear and chuckle. I handed her the bottle of wine I brought. She took it and told me I did not have to pretend I was generous because everyone knew I was careful with money. That was her polite way of calling me cheap, even though she knew exactly who paid the biggest bills in this family. She pulled me into the dining room like I was a prop. The cousins and aunts and uncles were already seated around the long table. The smell of roasted meat and spices filled the room. The caterers stood by the sideboard, trying not to look at anyone. My younger brother Daniel was leaning back in his chair, drink in hand, laughing with two of our cousins. He had his phone out and kept checking it, as if something more important might pop up at any moment. My mother started introducing me to people as if they did not already know me. She called me the son who was always busy with his little office job, the one who never gave her grandkids but at least helps with boring paperwork. People laughed. Some looked at me with that pitying smile people use when they are glad they are not you. I let it roll over me, the same way I always did. I took my seat near the middle of the table. My father sat at the head, red-faced and happy with the attention. When he noticed me, he lifted his glass and announced to everyone that his latecomer son had finally made it. He added a comment about how I must have been double-checking numbers on my calculator before I came, just to be sure he did not lose a cent. More laughter. Daniel slapped my shoulder and told me I should relax for once. He said with a grin that I needed to learn from him, because he knew how to have fun and take risks. In his mind, his series of failed startups were risks and not simple irresponsibility. People listened to him like he was some sort of visionary whose big break was just around the corner. My father encouraged that fantasy because it fit the story he liked, the bold younger son and the boring older one. Dinner started, plates were passed around, and the noise rose and fell with the clinking of cutlery. My father told stories from his younger days, all edited to make him seem brave and clever. Every time he slipped into a story about us, he turned it into another joke at my expense. He told them I was always too serious, that I had been born old. He said he had wanted a strong son who liked sports and taking charge, but instead he had got a boy who liked books and calculators. My mother added little details to underline it. She said she worried that no woman would ever accept someone like me because I was too quiet, too soft, too focused on numbers. She said she was glad at least Daniel gave her hope for future grandkids. The way she said it made it clear that she did not count on me at all. I ate in small bites and stayed quiet. I had heard versions of these lines my whole life. They were like a script they liked to repeat, and everyone had their role. My cousins looked down at their plates. My Aunt Monica, my mother's sister, sat near the end and gave me a small apologetic smile whenever my parents went too far. But she never said anything out loud. At one point, the topic turned to money. It always did. My father complained about rising prices, about how the government was against people like him, honest working men. He said nobody respected the older generation anymore. My mother added that they had to worry about bills now more than ever. I made the mistake of mentioning that the last property tax payment had already been handled. I said it quietly because I did not want to brag. It was just a fact. The bill had come, I had paid it. If I had not, they could have had real problems. My father looked at me with annoyance. He said I always made it sound like I was their savior. He said I liked to act like a martyr who carried the whole family on his back. My mother jumped in and told the table that I liked to remind them of every small thing I did, like paying a few bills as if they had not raised me, fed me, and kept me alive all these years. She said that bringing up money was rude at a celebration. My father leaned forward. His face had that tight, mean look I knew too well. He said I was a disappointment in many ways, not just socially, but even as a son. He said he had imagined his firstborn would be different, stronger, more impressive. He said that sometimes he thought life would have been easier if I had never been born at all. The table went quiet for a moment, then Daniel laughed, and that seemed to give my father more courage. He said he regretted my birth, that he regretted the way I had turned out, always judging, always making them feel like failures. He said that instead of gratitude, I brought tension to every room. My mother did not correct him. She did not tell him he was being harsh. Instead, she nodded and said she knew what he meant. She said she sometimes wished I would just disappear for a while so they could have peace. She added that if I felt so superior, maybe I should imagine they were not my parents at all. The words settled in the air like a heavy fog. I could see some relatives shifting in their seats. One cousin looked at his plate and stopped eating. Aunt Monica covered her mouth with her hand, stunned. Daniel was smirking, but it looked a little forced now. Inside, something very quiet happened to me. It was not an explosion. There was no wave of rage, no urge to shout or throw things. It was more like a door closing softly in my mind. I felt very calm. I understood that they had just said, out loud, in front of witnesses, something they had always hinted but never stated so clearly before. I put my fork down and placed my napkin on the table. My chair made a small sound as I pushed it back. Every eye turned to me. I stood up slowly. My hands were steady. I looked at my father, then at my mother. I told them, in a clear voice, that if they truly felt that way, then they should act as if I was not part of their lives anymore. I said that if my existence was such a burden, we could make it simple. From that moment on, they could pretend I did not exist. I said I would no longer force my presence or my support on people who regretted my birth. My father started to say something, but I did not wait. I took the spare house key from my pocket, the one I used to come by for repairs or emergencies, and I laid it gently next to my empty plate. That small metal sound was louder, in my memory, than any shout. I did not slam any doors, I did not curse. I simply walked around the table, past my stunned relatives, past my brother's confused grin, past my mother's open mouth. Aunt Monica reached out as if to touch my arm, but she stopped herself. I gave her a small nod as I passed. The hallway felt longer than usual. I picked up my coat from the hook by the door. I could hear my mother's voice behind me, high and sharp, but I did not listen to the words. I opened the front door and stepped into the cool evening air. Outside, the sound from the dining room became a muffled blur. I walked down the short path, across the driveway, and unlocked my car. As soon as I sat down inside and closed the door, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket. For a few seconds, I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the house I had saved once. Then my phone started vibrating. It buzzed so hard on the passenger seat that it moved a little. I picked it up and saw the screen light up. Call after call came in, one after another, from my mother, my father, my brother, and some relatives. The numbers climbed fast. When the phone finally paused, I saw I already had dozens of missed calls. There was also a new message from the family group chat. The title caught my eye. It said something about an urgent problem, about the house and the trust, about needing to talk right away because there might be a serious issue. I looked at the number on the screen again. 36 missed calls. The phone started vibrating once more in my hand as another call came in. I did not answer that last call. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the engine. My parents' house disappeared in the rearview mirror as I pulled away from the curb. The drive back to my apartment took about 20 minutes. The city lights blurred a little at the edges, not because I was crying, but because I felt strangely empty. It was like my mind had turned down the volume on everything. No anger, no shouting in my head, just a tired quiet. At a red light, I flipped the phone back over. More missed calls. New messages stacking up, one after another. My mother said I was overreacting and needed to come back inside. My father wrote that he had not meant it that way and that I should stop being dramatic. Daniel sent a laughing emoji, then a line telling me to chill and come back for dessert. Then there was the group chat message from Daniel. The title said, Urgent House Trust Problem. The text below was long, but I only caught parts of it while the light was still red. Something about a letter from the bank, something about dates, something about needing me to talk to the lawyer soon. The light turned green. I put the phone down again and drove the rest of the way in silence. When I got to my apartment, I parked, locked the car, and climbed the stairs with slow steps. My place was small, but neat. A one-bedroom on the third floor, clean walls, a tiny balcony, and a simple sofa facing the TV. I closed the door behind me and leaned my head against it for a moment. The phone began buzzing in my hand again. I did not pick up. Instead, I walked into the living room, dropped the phone on the coffee table, and turned off the sound. The screen kept lighting up in the dark room, like a small, stubborn lighthouse. I sank into the sofa and stared at the ceiling. I had not planned to cut them off that night. I had not planned anything, really. All I had planned was to show up, eat, smile, and go home tired as usual. But when my father said he regretted my birth and my mother did not stop him, something inside me finally understood that the situation was not going to get better by itself. My mind drifted back to when I was a kid. I was maybe 10 or 11. We lived in the same house, but it looked older and more worn back then. Money was always a problem. My father came home with grease on his hands and anger in his voice. My mother watched the bills pile up on the kitchen table. They thought I did not see the worry in her eyes, but I did. One night, I heard them arguing in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. My father said they had made a mistake having children so young. My mother said if I would just be less sensitive, things would be easier. They talked about me like I was a problem to solve. The next day, my father handed me a stack of envelopes and told me to mark the due dates on a piece of paper. He joked that since I liked numbers so much, I could help with the boring stuff. I took it as a compliment. I did not understand it was the beginning of a pattern. By the time I was 16, I knew more about our family finances than any teenager should. I knew which bills could be paid late without a penalty and which ones had to be paid on time. I knew when my father was lying about how well work was going. I knew when my mother acted calm for the relatives but panicked when she opened the mail. When I finished high school, I got accepted to a good university in another city. I remember the letter, the clean white envelope, and the way my heart jumped when I read it. I took it to the kitchen and showed my parents. My father barely glanced at it. My mother said it was nice, but immediately asked who would help with bills if I left. They did not forbid me to go. They just made it very clear that if I left, they would be in trouble. My father said he had no head for all that paperwork. My mother said she would drown without my help. She cried. She told me I should think about family duty. So I stayed. I went to community college nearby and took on part-time jobs. I did my classes in the day and worked in the evenings. I paid some bills directly, sometimes more than my fair share. My parents thanked me for a while. Then, slowly, it became normal. Expected. Years later, my father's small business almost collapsed. He had taken a loan he could not pay back. The bank started sending serious letters about the house and the debt. My parents panicked. They called me late at night, and my mother sobbed on the phone. My father said he had messed up and needed me to fix it, like always. We went together to the bank. I remember sitting across from the manager, a woman in her 50s with glasses and a calm voice. She explained that one option was to refinance, but they needed someone with stable income and better credit to co-sign. That meant me. I agreed because I was scared for them. I did not want them to lose the house. While we signed papers, the manager pointed to a section and said my name would be added to the title. She said I should keep copies for my records. My mother said it was just boring legal stuff and joked that at least one of her sons understood it. My father clapped me on the back and said I was finally being useful. They never spoke about it again as if it meant anything, but from that day on, I was not just their son. I was one of the legal owners of the roof above their heads. Years passed. I got a proper job. I moved into my own place. But still, the pattern held. When a bill was too high, they called me. When there was a fine, they called me. When a letter arrived with words they did not understand, they called me. I stepped in every time. I thought about all of that as I sat in the dark living room. The phone screen glowed. I finally picked it up and scrolled through the messages. My mother's tone shifted from angry to pleading and back again. First, she said I had embarrassed them in front of everyone. Then, a few messages later, she begged me to come back because they needed to talk about important documents regarding the house and Grandpa's trust. She said I could not just walk away because I had responsibilities to them. My father wrote that he had only said he regretted my birth in the heat of the moment, and that I should not take it literally. He added that whatever he said, I was still his son, and that sons take care of their parents. He said we had serious matters to discuss about the future of the house, and that I was involved whether I liked it or not. Daniel's messages were shorter. He told me I was being overdramatic and said our parents were old and stressed and did not mean everything they said. He reminded me that there were things I promised to handle, about renewing some agreement with the bank and with the lawyer who managed Grandpa Henry's trust. He said if I messed this up, the whole plan for their retirement and for future investments would be ruined. I put the phone down and rubbed my eyes. Grandpa Henry. It had been years since he passed. He had owned a small construction company and some land. He had not been rich, but he was careful. He liked to plan. When his health declined, he called me to his house one afternoon and asked me to help him go through his papers. That was the day I met Patricia, the lawyer. She was the one who handled his estate and the family trust. I could still see it in my mind, sitting at his dining table, stacks of documents in front of us. He told me in his quiet voice that he trusted me to be responsible. He said he had seen how my parents leaned on me and how they treated me. He said he wanted to make sure I had some protection in the future. I did not fully understand what he meant back then. I only understood that he asked me to go with him to Patricia's office and sign some things. Patricia had explained that there was a family trust. She said I would be the trustee after Henry passed, responsible for following his instructions. She used precise legal words that made my parents' eyes glaze over. Henry listened carefully and nodded. My parents just asked when the money would come. Someone took a photo that day, maybe Aunt Monica. In the picture, Henry is shaking my hand. We both look serious. Behind us, on Patricia's shelf, there is a thick binder with my name on the spine. I had forgotten about that photo until now. Still sitting on my sofa, I opened my phone's gallery and scrolled back years, through birthdays and work events and random meals. I finally found it. Me and Henry in that small office, holding hands in a formal handshake. The binder behind us was labeled with my name and something else I could not read clearly. Back then, I just felt proud that Henry trusted me. I did not know exactly what that binder contained. I still did not know every detail. All I knew was that any time my parents mentioned Grandpa's money, their eyes always slid over me, as if I was just a delivery person and not part of the plan. The phone lit again with new messages. Daniel wrote that I should stop acting like a victim and remember that a lot depended on my signature. He said there were deadlines and lawyers and interest rates and that we needed to meet with Patricia soon. He wrote that I had better not screw this up. I stared at that phrase for a long time. On my coffee table, next to the phone, was a small notebook I sometimes used to jot down numbers or ideas for work. On the cover, there was a pen clip. I reached over, opened it, and turned to a blank page. For the first time, I wrote down a simple list. Everything I had paid for in the last 5 years that was not mine. Property taxes, roof repair, hospital bill for my father's broken wrist, utility bills, even the catering for the dinner I had just left. The total was not exact, but even a rough sum made me sit back and exhale. It was a lot. It was the price of a small apartment. It was years of my life, translated into numbers. But what bothered me most was not the amount. It was the way none of it had ever been seen as a choice or a gift. For my parents, it was the bare minimum, owed to them as parents. For Daniel, it was just the invisible floor that let him keep chasing his dreams while I quietly paid for stability. The next morning, I went to work like any other day. My office was on the 10th floor of a glass building downtown. The lobby smelled of coffee and cleaning products. The elevator music was calm. It was a different world from my parents' house. At my desk, people greeted me with normal words. They asked about my weekend plans. They asked for help with spreadsheets, with forecasts, with reports. When my manager walked by, he nodded and thanked me for a project I finished last week. There was no mocking, no jokes about my birth, no guilt trips, just respect. Around mid-morning, I went to the break room to make coffee. Maya was there, leaning against the counter, scrolling on her phone. She was my age, maybe a little younger, and one of the few coworkers I considered a friend. She looked up and frowned slightly. She asked if I was okay. I said I was tired. She pointed out that I looked more than tired. She said my eyes had that I slept but did not rest look. I hesitated and then told her, in simple terms, what had happened the night before. I did not repeat every word my parents said, but I told her the main part, about the regret your birth line, about leaving my key on the table and walking out. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said that was terrible. She said parents were supposed to protect their children, not crush them. She asked if this kind of thing had happened before. I nodded and told her a little about the past, about the way they used guilt, about how they relied on me for money, about how I had stayed in town for them. I mentioned the house, the bank, the trust. I said I did not know all the details, only that I seemed to be in the middle of things again. She stared at me and shook her head. She said it sounded like they had been using me for years. She said I needed to remember that being their son did not mean being their doormat. She said I had more power than I thought, just based on what I had told her. Her words sat in my chest like a small weight, but not a bad one, more like something solid. Back at my desk, I opened my email. Amid work messages, there was one from Patricia's office. It was a newsletter of some kind, a generic update about financial planning and changes to some laws. I almost deleted it, then stopped. I clicked on it instead and saw her contact information at the bottom. Phone number, email, office address. I stared at it for a long moment, thinking of the old photo with Henry, the binder with my name, the way my parents spoke last night as if I were nothing, except when they needed my signature. My phone, on silent mode on the desk, buzzed again with my mother's name flashing on the screen. I turned it face down and looked back at Patricia's number. I did not call her yet, not that day, but in my mind, something shifted. The image of that binder in her office, with my name on it, would not leave my thoughts. The next few days felt strange, like I was walking through a life I knew well, but seeing it from a new angle. The morning after the dinner, I turned my phone back on fully and watched the notification bar fill up again. There were more missed calls, more messages, long chains in the family chat. My mother sent voice notes where she cried and said I had broken her heart. My father sent shorter texts where he said I needed to grow up and stop acting like a child. Daniel sent a mix of jokes and threats, saying I had started drama right before some important deadlines. Before all of this, I had started seeing a therapist once every 2 weeks. I began a few months earlier, after another bad argument with my parents that ended with me paying a bill and feeling like a ghost in my own life. I had almost canceled the next session, but now it felt like the one place where I could talk and not be told I was overreacting. When the appointment day came, I sat in the waiting room, staring at a painting of a tree on the wall. The receptionist called my name softly. I went into the small office, closed the door, and sat in the same armchair as always. The room smelled faintly of tea and old books. My therapist looked at me and asked how I had been since our last meeting. I told her that my parents had thrown a big dinner. I told her there had been jokes, then sharper comments, then the moment when my father said he regretted my birth, and my mother agreed. I told her I had put my key on the table and walked out. She listened without interrupting. She did not tell me I was sensitive or dramatic. When I finished, she asked how I felt in that moment at the table. I said I felt calm for the first time in a long time. I said it was like my brain finally accepted something my body already knew. She asked about the calls and messages after. I told her about the mix of guilt and demands, about the way my parents moved from anger to pleading, about the way Daniel reminded me of my duties. She asked me to describe those duties. I listed them: bills, paperwork, bank forms, trust issues, medical forms, all the invisible tasks that kept their life running. Then she asked a simple question: what would happen if I did none of that anymore? I answered that they would struggle. They would have to learn. They would maybe lose some comfort. They might even face serious problems with the house or the bank. As I listed these things, I heard how heavy they sounded. My therapist nodded and asked another question. Why did I believe it was my job alone to carry all of that? I did not have a good answer. I said because I always had. Because I was the responsible one. Because they told me so. Because if I did not, everything might fall apart, and I did not want to be blamed for that. She gently pointed out that they already blamed me for things anyway. They blamed me for tension, for speaking up, for stepping away even for one night. She asked why I valued their comfort more than my own dignity. The word dignity stayed in my head. We talked about patterns. She showed me how my parents used guilt and fear to keep me in place. She reminded me of something we had discussed in a past session, that saying no was not cruelty, especially when my yes was being used against me. I mentioned the house and the trust for the first time in detail. I told her about the refinancing, about my name being added to the title, about my grandfather taking me to his lawyer and making me trustee after he died. I said I never fully understood all the papers, but I knew there was more responsibility on me than anyone admitted. She leaned forward slightly. She said it sounded like I had more legal and financial power in this situation than my parents wanted to admit. She said that did not mean I had to punish them, but it did mean I had options beyond just paying and staying quiet. She asked if I had ever sat down with the lawyer alone and asked what my rights were. I said no. I had always gone with my parents, or I had just signed where I was told. I told her about the old photo in Patricia's office, the binder with my name on it that I could only half read. My therapist suggested I consider contacting Patricia without my parents present, simply to understand the facts. She did not tell me what decision to make. She only encouraged me to get clear information. She said that clarity was a kind of freedom. Before I left, she asked how it felt to imagine a life where my parents' crises were not always my automatic problem to solve. I said it felt both scary and light at the same time. After the session, I walked a few blocks to a small cafe near the office. It was one of those quiet places with big windows and small round tables. I ordered a coffee and sat by the glass, watching people hurry past on the sidewalk. My phone buzzed again and again in my pocket. I let it. A few minutes later, Maya texted to ask how the session had gone. I told her it was okay, that I was now thinking about a lot of things. She asked if I wanted company. I hesitated, then said yes. 10 minutes later, she walked in with her hair in a messy bun and a tired smile. She sat down across from me and asked if I wanted to talk or sit in silence. I decided to talk. I told her more about the house, about how my name had ended up on the title, about the trust, about how my parents always spoke as if Grandpa's money was their right. She listened with her chin resting on her hand. Then she shook her head, slow and amazed. She said it sounded like I had been carrying an entire family's stability on my back since I was a teenager. She said my parents sounded like people who had confused my kindness with weakness. I told her about my grandfather's comment in the lawyer's office, the one that had seemed vague to me at the time. He said something about wanting to make sure I was protected, about actions having consequences. I remembered Patricia mentioning that there were conditions in the trust, but my parents had not cared about the details, only the potential amounts. Maya frowned slightly. She asked if I thought there might be rules about respect or behavior in those documents. I said I did not know, but now that she said it, I remembered the way Patricia had paused while reading one section, then looked at Henry, then looked at me. She had asked if we were sure. Henry had said he was very sure. I pulled out my phone and opened the family messages. I showed Maya, without letting her hold the phone, some of the recent ones. The insults, the demands, the way my mother said I could not walk away because of my responsibilities with the trust and the house. The way Daniel said I had better not screw up their plan. Maya read a few lines, then looked at me. She said it was clear they did not see me as a person with feelings. They saw me as infrastructure, as a system they could plug into when they wanted money or help. She asked what I wanted, not what they wanted, not what would make them calm, but what I wanted. The question sat in the air between us. I realized I had not asked myself that in a long time. I said I wanted peace. I wanted to stop feeling like a bad son every time I thought about my own needs. I wanted to know clearly what the legal situation was. I wanted to see that binder in Patricia's office again and read what it actually said. Maya nodded slowly. She reminded me that I was not planning a crime or revenge movie plot. I was simply thinking about understanding the systems that already existed around me. She said my grandfather sounded like someone who cared about fairness, not just loyalty. She wondered out loud if he had already written a solution for this kind of treatment, and all I had to do was read it. Outside the cafe window, the sky was turning a dull gray. People rushed by with coats and bags. Inside, the coffee machine hissed softly. My phone vibrated again. A new message from my mother said she had spoken to Daniel and that I was being selfish. She said they had a lot to lose if I did not help soon. She barely mentioned my feelings. I opened a new folder in my phone gallery and named it Family Evidence. It felt strange to type that word, but also honest. I started saving screenshots, the messages where my parents called me ungrateful, the ones where they talked about my duties, the ones where they hinted at money and trust issues like a chain around my neck. I saved the voice notes too, the ones where my mother shifted from sweet to sharp when she thought I might say no. Maya watched me do it. She did not tell me to stop. She just asked if I felt safer having those things collected in one place. I said yes. It felt like finally admitting that what they were doing was real, not just in my head. I thought about Aunt Monica. She had sat at the end of the table that night, phone propped up to film the toast. I remembered the way she gasped when my father said he regretted my birth. I wondered if that moment was captured in the video. I wondered if she still had it. On the way home from the cafe, I called Aunt Monica. My voice felt steady. I asked how she was. She sounded tired and sad. She said she had wanted to call me but did not know if I would answer. She said what my parents had said at the dinner was wrong and that she was sorry she had not spoken up on the spot. I asked if she had recorded the toast. She hesitated, then admitted she had taken a short video for fun. She said she had not watched the whole thing after the dinner because it hurt to hear. I asked if she could send it to me. She agreed and said she understood why I might need it. A few minutes later, the video arrived on my phone. I watched it alone, standing in my kitchen. The shaky picture showed my father raising his glass, my mother smiling, the relatives clapping. Then the jokes started. Then the sharp words. Then the moment he said he regretted my birth and my mother nodded. I saw myself, in the background, go still. I saved the video into the same family evidence folder. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about my grandfather again. I pictured his lined face, his calm hands, the way he had looked at me when he signed those documents. He had told me that one day I would need to remember my own worth. At the time, I thought he meant I should not undersell myself at work. Now, it felt bigger than that. The next morning, I woke up to another storm of messages. My father saying we needed to talk about adjusting the trust, My mother saying they were considering legal steps, or if I refused to help. Daniel saying he was going to call Patricia himself if I did not cooperate. That last part made something inside me settle, not stir. The idea of them calling Patricia and trying to push her around made my stomach knot. She knew Henry's wishes. She knew the structure. I did not want my parents to reach her first with their version of reality. I unlocked my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled down until I found Patricia's name. It had been years since I had called her. My thumb hovered over the screen. I thought of what my therapist had said about clarity. I thought of Maya's words about power. I thought of the binder with my name. Then I pressed the call button. The line rang twice before an assistant picked up. She introduced herself and said Patricia was in a meeting. She asked how she could help. My voice was calm when I said my name, reminded her I was Henry Cole's grandson, and asked if I could schedule a private appointment to review the trust and some related documents. The assistant recognized the name. Her tone shifted slightly, more formal, more attentive. She said Patricia would be glad to see me and offered a slot later that week. I accepted. She confirmed the time and the office address. When I hung up, I realized my hands were not shaking. I felt more grounded than I had in a long time. I saved the appointment in my calendar and stared at the date. It was just a line on the screen, but it felt like a line in my life as well. For the first time, I was not walking into a meeting to fix my parents' problems. I was walking into one to understand my own position. The day of my appointment with Patricia came faster than I expected. Her office was in a mid-rise building downtown, not far from where I worked. I took a late lunch break and walked there instead of eating. The lobby was quiet, with gray tiles and soft music. I took the elevator up and tried not to think about how many times, in the past, I had signed papers without really knowing what they meant. The assistant at the front desk greeted me and said Patricia would be ready soon. She recognized my name and mentioned that it had been a while since I was last there. I sat on a chair by the window and looked out at the street below while my heart tapped a slow rhythm in my chest. When Patricia called me in, she stood up from behind her desk and offered a small handshake. She was in her mid-50s now, with short hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She said it was good to see me again and that she remembered me coming in with my grandfather years ago. She pointed to a chair. I sat. On the shelf behind her, I saw it. A thick binder with my last name on the spine. It might not have been the same one from the photo, but it looked similar. My name, printed in black letters, felt heavier than the paper itself. Patricia asked what brought me in. I told her, in simple terms, that my parents had brought up the house and the trust again. I said things had been tense and that I wanted to understand my position as trustee and as someone whose name was on the house. She nodded, opened a drawer, and pulled out a file. It had my grandfather's name on the tab. She flipped through a few pages, reading in silence for a moment. Then she began to explain. She reminded me that my grandfather had created a family trust. In that trust, he listed some assets. His company shares he later sold, some savings, and certain instructions about how the income should be used. I was the trustee after his death. That meant I had a duty to manage the assets fairly and according to his written wishes. She described in plain language that my parents were among the beneficiaries. So were I, and, in theory, future grandchildren. She also reminded me that my grandfather had added some conditions. He had been very clear that respect and basic decency mattered to him. There were sections about what would happen if a beneficiary engaged in serious abuse, waste, or behavior that strongly violated family obligations. She did not push the papers toward me yet. She just summarized. She said there were clauses that allowed the trustee to adjust distributions or even redirect them under certain conditions, but only with proper documentation and proof. She spoke in calm, precise sentences, like she always did. Then she turned to the house. She took out copies of the deed and the refinancing agreement from years ago. She showed me where my name appeared. She explained that I was not just a co-signer of a loan. Legally, I was an owner. She said any decisions about the property could not be made without me. She added that, at this point, because of the way some refinances and payments had been structured, my stake was not small. I listened and tried to keep my face neutral. Inside, it felt like puzzle pieces that had been scattered for years were suddenly clicking together. My parents had always talked as if the house and the trust were things they controlled and I only managed. Here, in Patricia's office, the picture was different. I told her briefly what had happened at the dinner. I did not dramatize it. I simply said that my father had said he regretted my birth, that my mother had agreed, and that it happened in front of witnesses. I said I had walked out, and that since then there had been pressure and guilt from the family. Patricia listened and folded her hands. She said she was sorry I had gone through that. Then she said, from a legal point of view, words like that, said in public and recorded, could matter if they formed a pattern with other behavior. She emphasized that her role was not to judge my parents as people, but to advise me on the structure my grandfather set up. She asked if I had any evidence. I told her about the video from Aunt Monica, about the messages and voice notes, about the long history of financial dependence. I said I had started saving copies in a separate folder. She nodded and said that was wise, not for drama, but for clarity. Patricia did not tell me what to do. Instead, she explained my options. One option was to continue as before, keep paying and managing and hoping things improved. Another was to start enforcing certain sections of the trust, adjusting or delaying distributions, placing conditions on them, or redirecting some of the benefit to other purposes if clear lines were crossed. Another option involved the house, setting up formal agreements about who paid what, or even, in extreme cases, requiring a change in living arrangements. She repeated that any step would need to be careful, documented, and in line with the trust language. She advised me to take time to think. She offered to send me a summary of my rights and duties by email, written in plain terms. When I left her office, I did not have any signed documents. I had no printed orders in my hand, but I had something I had not had before, a clear picture of the landscape. There were paths in front of me that did not exist in my parents' version of the story. On the sidewalk outside, my phone buzzed. A new message from my mother said she and my father had talked and decided we needed to have a serious family talk soon. She mentioned the trust by name and said they wanted to finalize some arrangements before it was too late. She insisted that I had to be there because none of this works without you. I went back to work, finished the day, and went home. That night, I tried to cook something simple, but I mostly pushed the food around the plate. My head was full of numbers and phrases: beneficiary, trustee, distribution, owner, conditions. A few days later, my mother called me in a panic. When I answered, her voice was shaking. She said my father had had a scare at home. Chest pains, dizziness. She said he was fine now, but at the hospital for tests. She asked me to come because she did not know how to handle the paperwork, the insurance, the forms. I went. Whatever else was happening, he was still my father, and a hospital was not the place to debate trust clauses. The emergency had passed by the time I arrived. He sat in a bed in a hospital room, hooked up to some monitors, but stable. My mother was by his side, wringing her hands. They thanked me for coming, but it did not last long. Soon my father was making comments again. He said the nurses spoke to me like I was in charge, that they should be talking to him, the head of the family. My mother told a nurse that I was good for the boring stuff, like forms and signatures, and smiled in that way she used when she wanted someone to agree with her. When a staff member brought in a stack of papers about insurance and next steps, my mother handed them straight to me without even looking. She said that I knew how to deal with it and asked me to make sure there were no surprises with costs. I read the forms, filled what I could, and asked for clarifications from the staff. It was routine for me, but in that moment, it felt different. I saw clearly that to them I was not a person. I was a system. Later, in the hospital cafeteria, my parents and I sat at a small table with plastic chairs. My father complained about the food. My mother talked about how hard their life was, how stressful it was to think about money and aging. She said at least they had me, and that I would not abandon them because that would be unthinkable. I listened and stirred my coffee. Neither of them mentioned the dinner. Neither of them apologized. They spoke as if that night was a small argument and not a line they had crossed. In their eyes, my role was already back to normal. I was the son who came running when they called. Before I left the hospital, Aunt Monica caught up with me in the hallway. She looked tired, like she had not slept well. She said she was glad I had come to check on my father, but she also said she understood if I needed distance from them. She told me my parents had been talking a lot about making sure the money goes where it should, and about locking things in soon. I asked if they had mentioned the dinner. She nodded slowly. She said they had tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, that they had not really meant what they said, and that I was being oversensitive. She told me quietly that she did not agree with them. She said what they said that night had shocked her. Back at my apartment, I added notes to my timeline. I had started one after meeting Patricia. A simple document where I wrote down dates and events. The dinner, the hospital visit, the things they said, the things I did. I added sections for evidence. The video, the messages, the trust summary Patricia had emailed me. Days later, the message came that shifted everything toward a new stage. It arrived in the evening, just as I was finishing a simple meal. It was from my father, sent to the family group chat. The subject line was written in all caps. He said we were going to have a formal family dinner at a restaurant in a week. He called it an important meeting to clear up misunderstandings and to finalize future arrangements regarding the house and the trust. He wrote that everyone was expected to attend, especially me. My mother added a second message saying we needed to talk like adults and that she hoped I would not make a scene this time. Daniel jumped into the chat with a string of messages. He said this dinner was our chance to get everything sorted. He wrote that we needed to align on strategy with the trust, the house, and some opportunities he had in mind. He added a line telling me not to overthink and just show up ready to sign what needed signing. I stared at the screen. The old version of me would have felt trapped. I would have seen this dinner as a trial where I had to prove I was a good son, where saying no would be seen as betrayal. But now I had seen the other side of the story. I had seen the documents, the clauses, the structure my grandfather had built. I did not reply right away. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. My reflection in the glass looked tired but steady. After a minute, I went back to the sofa, picked up the phone, and typed a simple message in the chat. I wrote that I would be there. They responded quickly. My mother sent a relieved message saying I had made the right choice. My father wrote that he appreciated my maturity. Daniel sent a thumbs-up emoji and added that we were going to make big moves together. I closed the chat and opened my calendar app. The restaurant dinner was 1 week away. I added it as an event. Then, with my thumb hovering over the screen, I created another event a few days before the dinner. I did not fill in all the details yet. I just wrote a short note to myself on that earlier date at Patricia's office address. Follow up with Patricia. Options. My phone vibrated on the nightstand early in the morning, long before my alarm. For a moment, I thought it was another message from my mother, but when I reached for the screen, I realized it was only a weather alert. The city was expecting light rain, nothing dramatic. It felt like a small gift, something normal in the middle of a week that was anything but normal. I lay there staring at the ceiling. The restaurant dinner was getting closer. Every day, my parents sent more reminders, wrapped in guilt or in false sweetness. My father wrote that he had plans for the evening and that he needed me to be cooperative. My mother kept saying she wanted us to look like a united family in front of the relatives. Daniel sent messages with half-formed ideas about investments and leveraging the trust and putting the house to work. He talked like a man with a plan, but I knew he had no real understanding of any of the legal structures he was referencing. 3 days before the dinner, I had my follow-up appointment with Patricia. I arrived at her office a few minutes early. The assistant recognized me again and asked if I wanted water or coffee. I declined and waited in the small lobby, feeling the weight of my grandparents' photo on the wall, the one where Henry stood proudly in front of his first construction project. It was a reminder that the trust came from real work, not from entitlement. Patricia called me in. She had a few folders on her desk already open. She said she had prepared a summary of potential actions based on the trust and the house. She emphasized again that nothing needed to be rushed and that all decisions were mine alone. She walked me through the documents, not the full legal text, just clear explanations. She told me what would happen if I chose to execute certain clauses in the trust. She explained how distributions could be redirected and how the trustee had the power to suspend or alter them if certain conditions were met. She reminded me that the video from the dinner was strong evidence of public disrespect, especially when combined with the message history. She also went over the house situation. She showed me how the payments over the years had shifted ownership balance. She told me what would happen if I issued a formal notice requiring my parents to take full responsibility for the costs or to make new living arrangements. She explained that this was not eviction, but a legal obligation tied to shared ownership. She spoke the way people speak during surgery. Calm, focused, careful. She did not pressure me. She did not tell me what to do. She only made sure I understood the tools I already had. I sat there for a while after she finished. I looked at my name printed on the top of one of the summary pages. Seeing it there, calmly framed by legal terms and responsibilities, felt strange. It was like seeing myself from outside, in a situation that had been building for years without me noticing. I asked her for printed copies of the summaries. She gave them to me in a simple envelope. It felt heavier than it should have. Before I left, Patricia asked one question. How do you want your life to look after this dinner? I did not have a perfect answer. I just said I wanted peace. I said I did not want to be chained to guilt anymore. She nodded and told me that, whatever I chose to do, I had the right to act in a way that protected my well-being and honored my grandfather's intentions. I thanked her and walked out into the hallway. My steps felt slow, like I was carrying something fragile but important. That afternoon, I went to the bank. Not the branch where my parents liked to go, but the one closer to my apartment, the one where no one knew our family stories. I asked to see a notary. The bank manager recognized me from previous visits and said she could help. I sat at a desk while she prepared the necessary forms. I signed a few documents, some confirming ownership details, some updating contact information tied to the house, some confirming that future property-related communication would go directly to me rather than through my parents. I also signed a notice that, once delivered, would require my parents to take full financial responsibility for the house unless a new agreement was made. The manager asked if I needed any duplicates. I told her yes. She printed everything and stamped each page with a crisp blue seal. When she handed them to me, the papers were still warm. I left the bank with an organized folder, a small stack of notarized pages, and a tight feeling in my chest. Not fear, resolve. It was like standing on the edge of a bridge where the other side had been hidden by fog for years, and now the air was finally clearing. At home, I laid everything out on my dining table. The trust summaries, the house notices, the documents Patricia had prepared, the drafts of letters I would include in the envelopes for each family member. I read through them slowly, making sure I understood every line. Then I began assembling the envelopes. For my father, the notice about the trust clause, the new rules for distributions, and the property-related requirements. For my mother, the same documents, but I added a letter explaining my decision to step back from being their financial representative and the person who handled insurance and medical forms. For Daniel, a summary explaining that trust distributions no longer served as a safety net for him and that he would need to become financially independent. I wrote this one twice, tearing up the first draft when it sounded too emotional. I wanted it calm, clear, honest. For Aunt Monica, only a letter. I thanked her for her kindness and her honesty. I told her that her video had been important for clarity, but that I would not use it publicly beyond what was necessary. I included nothing else. She had never used me. I sealed each envelope carefully and placed them into a single document pouch. The day before the dinner, I felt strangely calm. My parents sent message after message trying to make sure I would come. My mother wrote that she had chosen a nice restaurant to show the relatives we are united. My father wrote that we needed to present a solid front when discussing arrangements. Daniel messaged me saying he needed me to back him up because his new project required certain assurances. They talked as if nothing had changed, as if I was still the person who would bend. That night, I decided to cook, not because I was hungry, but because the act of preparing something simple, rice, vegetables, lightly seasoned chicken, made my body relax. I needed that calm. After dinner, I sat down on my sofa and opened the Notes app on my phone. I wrote a short speech, not dramatic, not angry, just a simple, clear explanation of what I was doing and why. I knew I would not read it word for word, but writing it helped me shape my thoughts. I kept returning to one line. I am not doing this to punish anyone. I am doing it because you told me I did not matter, and I finally listened. When I finished writing, I deleted the draft. I did not want to memorize it. I only wanted to understand myself. The next morning, the day of the dinner, I woke before the sun. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I made coffee and drank it slowly by the window. I watched the sky shift from gray to pale blue. I showered, shaved, and chose simple clothes. A clean button-down shirt. Dark pants. Nothing flashy. Nothing that said I wanted attention. I was not going there to perform. I was going there to end something. Before I left, I checked the document pouch one more time. All the envelopes were inside. The notarized papers, the letters, the trust summaries. I added one last item. The USB drive with the audio and video evidence saved on it. I placed everything in my bag. When it was almost time to go, my heart began to beat faster. Not out of fear, but anticipation. This was the moment the old version of me had always avoided. The version that feared disappointing people. The version that tried to keep peace by breaking himself quietly. I stood in front of the mirror. I looked tired, but steady. My eyes looked clearer than they had in months. My phone buzzed. A reminder. Family dinner, 6:00 p.m. Right below it was another reminder, set earlier that morning. Breathe. I grabbed my bag and left the apartment. The restaurant was across town, in an area filled with small shops and warm lights. I parked a block away and walked slowly. Each step felt like it belonged to someone older, wiser, more certain of his boundaries. When I reached the restaurant, I paused by the entrance. I could hear voices inside, my family's voices, louder than the soft music playing in the lobby. I realized that they were already in the private room, probably already talking about plans and roles and signatures. I placed my hand on the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. A server greeted me and asked if I was with the Cole family. I nodded. She led me down a short hallway toward a closed door at the end. When she opened it, the room went quiet for half a second. My father was already standing, holding a glass. It looked like he was in the middle of a toast. He froze when he saw me. My mother's smile tightened. Daniel leaned back in his chair and lifted his eyebrows like he had expected me to come crawling. Several relatives turned to look at me, curious, cautious, some already holding their phones like they were ready to record a pleasant family speech. I walked all the way in, and the server closed the door behind me with a soft, final click. That sound felt like a line being drawn between past and future. I placed my bag on the empty chair beside me and took my seat. The room held its breath. The stage was set. My father cleared his throat, trying to recover the moment he thought he controlled. He lifted his glass again and said something about family unity and moving forward. His voice shook a little, but he forced a smile. My mother nodded beside him, her hands folded tightly, knuckles pale. I didn't interrupt. I let him finish every word. When he lowered the glass, I stood up slowly. The room went silent. Forks paused midair. A few relatives tilted their phones slightly, ready to record if something dramatic happened. Daniel leaned forward, smirking, as if waiting for me to explain myself or apologize. I kept my voice calm. I said I had come tonight to listen, but also to speak clearly. I said I wanted everyone to know the full truth before any arrangements or plans were discussed. My father waved a hand as if to dismiss me and muttered that we could talk privately later. I said no. If they disrespected me publicly, then the truth could be spoken publicly as well. Then I reached into my bag and took out a small USB drive. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I simply said, "Before we talk about the future, we should hear the past as it actually happened." I pressed a button on a small portable speaker I'd brought. The sound filled the room. My father's voice from the dinner, my mother's agreement, the line where he said they regretted my birth, the laughter, the silence that followed, and then the sound of my chair as I stood and walked away. You could feel the air change. The relatives who had been relaxed now sat up straight. Aunt Monica lowered her gaze, her lips pressed tightly. My father's face went cold. My mother whispered my name, a warning mixed with panic. I turned off the speaker. I told the room that these were not isolated words, that this was a pattern that stretched back decades, that I had carried the family's finances, paperwork, emergencies, and responsibilities since I was a teenager, that I had sacrificed opportunities and time and energy to keep everything running, and that, in return, I had been mocked, belittled, used, and blamed. My father snapped that I was exaggerating. My mother said I was being dramatic in front of the family. Daniel muttered that I should stop embarrassing everyone. I didn't argue. I didn't look angry. I only reached into my bag again and placed 3 sealed envelopes on the table, one for each of them. I pushed them forward. I told them these envelopes contained documents they needed to read carefully. Then I sat back down. Daniel grabbed his first, ripping it open. His eyes scanned the papers, and the smirk dropped from his face. Inside was a formal notice explaining that the trust would no longer provide any support for him, that distributions for him were suspended, and that he was expected to become financially independent. His lips parted, but no sound came out. My mother opened hers next. Her face went pale as she saw the letter of resignation from me as her financial representative and medical power of attorney. Attached was a list of agencies and offices she would now be dealing with herself. Another document notified her of adjustments in trust distributions. She pressed a shaking hand to her chest and said my name like a plea. My father opened his last. The room fell completely silent as he read. The notice inside informed him that I had executed the trust's behavioral clause, written by my grandfather, not by me, which allowed the trustee to redirect distributions when a beneficiary publicly disrespected or disowned the trustee. Attached was a certified copy of the new distribution path. He also found the notarized property notice requiring him and my mother to take full responsibility for the house's costs or vacate within a legal time frame. When he finished reading, he stared at me with something between disbelief and fury. He said I couldn't do this. He said I had no right. That was when the last piece of the evening fell into place. The door opened, and Patricia stepped inside calmly. My family turned in unison. A few relatives even gasped. She introduced herself formally and said she was there only to confirm the legality of the documents in their hands. She explained, in a steady, professional voice, that everything had already been filed, that the trust clauses were being executed according to the instructions Henry Cole had written, that my role as trustee gave me both the responsibility and the authority to take these actions, that the property notices were valid, notarized, and enforceable. My father looked stunned. My mother whispered that this was cruel. Daniel muttered that I had ruined his future. Several relatives avoided eye contact with them and looked at me instead, with pity, with understanding, even with quiet respect. I said only one thing before I left. I'm not punishing you. I'm honoring the truth you gave me. You told me I didn't matter. So from now on, I won't carry the weight of people who see me that way. My father tried to stand, but his legs shook. My mother began crying softly. Daniel put his head in his hands. Patricia placed business cards on the table and told them they could contact her office with questions, but the decisions were final. I picked up my bag. The room felt smaller now, tighter, as if all the years of pressure had shifted onto the right shoulders for once. As I walked toward the door, no one stopped me. No one called my name. The silence was louder than any shouting could have been. Outside, the hallway felt cool and open. I walked out of the restaurant, across the parking lot, and unlocked my car. My phone buzzed with new messages starting to appear, but I didn't look at them. I placed the phone face down on the seat. I closed the door, shut out the noise, and sat there in the quiet. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself.